There are no rules. That is how art is born, how breakthroughs happen. Go against the rules or ignore the rules. That is what invention is about. Artist Helen Frankenthaler. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love arts. Patrick Saunders' paintings have won many awards and received much recognition. His studio works earned him membership in notable painting organizations, including becoming a signature member of Oil Painters of America. When Patrick began plein air painting in 2013, he won awards from numerous nationally recognized events and organizations. However, whether he paints indoors or outdoors, he does not want to be known by where he paints. He doesn't want to be known as a plein air painter. He doesn't want to be known as a studio painter. Rather, he considers himself simply as a painter drawn to many subjects. The subject matter of his paintings include landscapes, cityscapes, animals, pets, and florals. Many of these subjects Patrick discovers along the thousands of miles he and his wife, photographer Kimberly Saunders, travel in their Airstream across the country. As he and his wife travel, he searches out the colors, textures, and values of everyday life that are all too often taken for granted. In this episode, Patrick talks about the challenge of overcoming preconceptions about how something should be painted. It requires keen observation of what is before us. Our belief that some subjects are more difficult to paint than others may also be the result of deeply rooted preconceptions. Careful observation and the willingness to view art making as a series of little mistakes corrected and adjusted throughout our painting session helps us overcome our preconceived notions about painting. Patrick Saunders' work clearly demonstrates that he diligently strives to paint with no preconceptions. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Patrick, I'm really happy to have you on the Artful Painter podcast today. I met you back in end of January. You did a demo at the Piedmont Driving Club here in Atlanta, Georgia, at the beautiful Piedmont Park in connection with Olmsted Plein Air. And you also came to Three Hearts Farm in Newnan. So got to see you a couple of times. And that was it was a real pleasure to meet you there.
Pleasure to meet you as well. I was there in Newnan for the entire month of January. I was doing a residency with the Newnan Art Residency Program. So I got to experience everything Newnan had to offer. Well, I can't say everything because I was only there a month, but also the surrounding area. So that's why we made it up to Atlanta to do that demonstration.
Well, you couldn't have picked a more beautiful place to do a month-long residency. Newnan is just a beautiful city, and the countryside around it is just incredible.
And I was really surprised how dedicated they were to the arts in that community. At the time that I was there, they had some photography that was displayed on large banners. It may still be up throughout the city, and it had a write-up in the New York Times. It was fantastic work.
Yeah, that's where David Boyd's gallery is. It's just yeah, exactly. I've worked many years. I had clients in Newnan, so I spent a lot of time in Newnan. I loved commuting there. It's a beautiful drive from my home here in Douglasville. It's all country roads. I don't have to take any interstate to get there. And each place is a painting waiting to happen. It's just a beautiful place. You were at Gray Cottage, right?
Was beautiful.
Yeah.
I was, yes. We spent the month at Gray Cottage, which was great because I had a full studio, which has not been the norm for me for the past 5 years because we've been living on the road.
Well, we'll have to talk about that living on the road a little bit in a minute, but I do want to know about a residency, how that works. I've never had an experience with that. I'm a beginning painter, and I've heard about artist residencies. What's the experience like, and what's the expectation when you do a residency like that?
So I was part of Olmsted Plein Air last year, and I met Millie Ghosh, another artist who was a part of the event, and she invited me to be a part of the residency. And I was asked, well, my wife and I were asked to come to Noonan, stay in the cottage, and just paint, create whatever I wanted to create. And in return, I just welcomed the community in to be a part of it. So I gave some demonstration paintings, some to some high school students, and one to the full public at the library. And then at the end of the month, I had a show of all the work I'd created. And anyone from the town was welcome to come. And we had people come from as far as Atlanta. It was actually really well received.
Yeah, I didn't get to make it. I really wanted to come see it. I had another commitment at the time. I would have loved to have seen that. But what a wonderful experience not to have any restrictions really on what you're painting and what you're doing there, and then the interaction with the community.
No. Yeah, there were no restrictions at all. I could do absolutely anything I wanted, which was great. Normally in a residency, I'm sure it varies, but normally you have a proposal. And my proposal was really just to paint what I wanted to paint, because that's what my art is all about. It's about painting my experiences, and they supported that. So the subject matter was unlimited. I could do whatever I wanted.
Boy, that's a far cry from when you were a professional commercial illustrator, when people were telling you what to paint, right?
Absolutely. And I don't miss those days, I must say. It's great to be able to paint what satisfies you and what excites you. And that's really when you get your best work. When someone's telling you what to paint, it's just a job. And I'm not interested in that. I still take commissions occasionally because I can find something that I'm interested in those portrait commissions or pet portrait commissions, because I like to paint people and pets. But for the most part, I paint what excites me.
Well, did you have a good experience interacting with the community while you were there?
Absolutely. So I painted around the town, and I also painted in the studio, and everyone there was excited about it. And they knew a lot about it. It's a smaller community, but it's a growing city. And I was surprised how many people knew about the residency and were interested in it and wanted to know when I was going to have the studio open so that they could come by and check it out. When I was out on the street painting, people would come by and chat with me.
Neat.
They were all into it. Everybody was excited.
Did you have any memorable conversations on the street? Most
conversations are pretty similar. People see you painting, and the first thing they do is a double take, like, oh, you're painting. And yes, I'm painting. Well, then they start to talk about how they relate to painting, who they know that's a painter, or if they themselves are a painter. And we connect over that and bond over that. And then what they always do is tell me a story about what it is I'm painting. They're very excited to let you know that they're a part of that. And so then they feel more connected to your painting as well, because it involves their past and their experiences. And for me, that's the most exciting thing about painting outdoors. I get to hear about things that I just connected to usually from a visual standpoint. I get to hear the history of those places or other people's personal experiences. So there was a home that I painted on the south side of downtown Noonan. It turns out it was an old Civil War hospital. So I heard a lot of stories about that.
Wow.
Fantastic stories.
Yeah. That's the beauty of this. It truly is. You get to connect with people. I did a painting not too long ago. I had a similar experience where I was in Colorado, and I didn't do it as an outdoor painting because I just didn't have the time at the time to do it. But I took several photos with an old Yashica Mat 124G film camera. And I found this diner, and I painted it, and I put it on YouTube. And I had a woman just this week reach out to me and says, "Hi, I worked there when I was 12 years old." I said, "Whoa." So, I got the story within the story as a result of that. So it was pretty cool. But anyway.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And I find that throughout the country. The same thing happens. No matter what I paint, somebody has some connection with that, and they have a story to tell. And I welcome that, because that makes me feel more connected. That's been one of the greatest things about traveling the country and making art. No matter where we go, there's so much history that we wouldn't normally know about, but there are people that come out and tell us about it. And after the fact, if we post our work on social media, people tell us stories in the comments and let us know how they interacted with that same place.
It sounds like you're a collector of stories.
Yeah, mine and other people's. That's right.
Yeah, that's neat. That is so neat. So you've been traveling across the country for how long now? When did you start this?
It's been 5 years now. We sold our home and everything we owned in July of 2015. And so we have been on the road living in an Airstream for the past 5 years. Traveled border to border, coast to coast. We spend maybe a couple weeks max in any one place. It varies. But then you really get to know the places you're in, which makes a big difference. When I worked in the commercial world in advertising, I would travel a lot. But that was very different because I would get on a plane and fly to some place like Paris or Barcelona, go to a corporate boardroom, give a presentation, get back on the plane and come home. So I got to travel far and wide, but I didn't get to experience anything. And you have to spend some time to really get to know a place.
And that's what I like about traveling in an RV or a camping trailer is you do get to park and you stay there for a few weeks and you get the sense of the land, the lay of the land and the people there. So, and you get to see things that aren't touristy. They go beyond that. You get to experience the reality of a place. I keep resolving, I don't even want to mention the COVID-19 or the pandemic because it just weighs on my mind so much. And I know it does on a lot of people, right. But the reality is it is a part of our life right now in a way that nothing else has been in many years. So how's that affected your travels? How have you been impacted by it?
Right now we're not traveling. It's just not safe to travel. So we're staying in a small town in Texas, and I've secured a small studio space because the weather doesn't always cooperate. It's hard to paint in a small travel trailer. Normally I paint outdoors. I have a canopy I can set up, and I prefer to paint outdoors, even if I'm painting from photo reference and not from the landscape or from a live subject. The light is just better outdoors. But at this time of year, the weather can be pretty unpredictable. We've had quite a few storms here, and it gets pretty windy in North Texas. So we did secure a small studio space that I can work in. And we've always been asked to create instructional videos.
Right.
And I just haven't done that because my preference is to travel and teach workshops and work with people directly one-on-one. It's not only better for them, but I feel like it's good for me because I learn a lot from them. So I've been reluctant to do any type of instructional videos. But now that we have the time and we're secluded beyond just painting what I want to paint, we are recording some of that. So we'll be releasing a series of instructional videos.
And you have a wonderful advantage there because your wife, Kimberly, is quite a wonderful photographer and videographer. So what a team that's going to be.
That's right. I couldn't do it without her. Really, I wouldn't do it without her. She not only has the technical skills to do it, but she inspires me to do it and says, hey, this would be great. Let's do this. Let's try this. Let's, most of the things that we've done that are risky, like selling our home, they've been her idea. She's the one that gets me to do these things that the practical side of me says, oh, we could never do that. Kimberly says, why not?
Wow.
So I
very supportive.
I couldn't do this without her. Yeah. Absolutely. And everybody needs that. Every artist needs that. If there's one thing that I think is ubiquitous is with all artists, it's self-doubt. We all have that. So if you have someone else to check your ideas with or even push you over the line to try new things, that's invaluable.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's, my wife has been very supportive of what I do over the years, and I am very, very grateful to her for that. So I identify with you on that. That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that you're doing, though, I think is very good. You're doing your own instructional videos. I do see, and this is not a criticism, but it is an observation because I made my living creating content, for training videos and that sort of thing. And one of the lessons I learned earlier on in my career was you need to own the race course. In other words, people go to a racetrack with the horses. They either own the horse or the racetrack. Well, who makes the money? It's the guy that owns the race course. You own your own content. And I think that's, especially in these days and times, though it's harder to do, I think artists do very well to create their own content and to own it and to sell it without a middleman anywhere in that process. That's just my opinion on that.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I feel exactly the same way. I used to work, I wouldn't say I worked in the music industry, but I was involved in the music industry. I played in bands for years.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew that many of my friends played in bands. They were signed to major labels. There was a huge signing spree in the early 90s. And I saw that there was a lot of abuse where record labels would come in and they would sign small, rampant, unknown bands. Yes. And that was to lock them in. And then they couldn't go anywhere else, and they wouldn't own their own songs. They would give them money up front so that they could create music and record an album, with the terms being that they would have to pay that money back. But of course, once the record company had you locked in, they had no reason to promote your album, so you never did make that money back. I think the same thing's happening now.
I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And we're seeing it with art. So art videos are exploding. They're everywhere on the market. And there's one for every little niche. And they all say, here's the trick or the secret. And I just don't believe any of that. There's so many that these companies that are doing them, they don't need to promote any particular one. They sell them in bulk. So I'm reluctant to get involved with any type of publisher. I think doing it yourself is absolutely the way to go. Not only do you own the content, but you control the content, you control the way it's marketed, you control the story behind it. And that's really important.
Exactly. That's the key to it. You have complete ownership. You can take your time in doing it. You produce what you want to produce, and you sell it for what you want to sell it for, and no one else is taking it. You mentioned the record label. See, what they promoted, they'd give a person an advance, which, most musicians they were hurting financially. So if they get that signing bonus, that's a lot of money, but they go through it real fast. But
they go through it really fast, and then they have to pay it back.
Exactly. Well, see, it's a revenue share. So that's how it's advertised. It's a revenue sharing. So you're going to get a small piece of the pie. However, the accounting is done after gross receipts. It's done based on profit, as reported to the IRS. And most companies do not report a profit to the IRS. So you don't make anything. You make nothing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that happens not just with video production now. It happens with print sales. It can happen with the sale of your actual art as well if you're not careful. So you need to understand what the percentage is anyone's taking. There seems to be this whole industry that has grown up around art, and it centers around the publishing industry, publishing being mostly print and now video. And I think all artists have to be aware what that industry's goal is to make a profit for themselves. It is not about promoting any of us or advancing the art world or what we do.
I do think that artists can do more for themselves and still benefit their audience without having a middleman involved. I just don't think you need the middleman. The technology is there, the services are there. You can do it yourself, and you'll
yes.
You can sell it more affordably, or you can sell it at whatever price you think it's worth, and it's all yours. It's your revenue. You get to keep it.
Right.
And I think that's important, especially with things the way they're going right now. For the next several months, things are going to be tight for artists.
Right. And also that bleeds into marketing opportunities. There's never been a better time to be an artist when it comes to marketing because of social media. And we didn't have this 10 years ago. It wasn't as effective as it is today. And it's growing more and more and more. And having worked as a marketing executive, we saw that growth happening quickly, exponentially, and it changed the entire industry. I worked at a small, I would call it relatively small, digital advertising agency in Kansas City, Missouri. And they partnered with a much larger company in New York, one of the largest advertising agencies in the world. So that agency didn't understand digital marketing at all. So I was sent to New York to work with that company for years. We lived in Brooklyn. And I don't work there anymore, obviously. I left to pursue my art full time. But that small digital agency from Kansas City actually took over the larger global ad agency in New York because of their focus on social media and digital marketing. We've seen the same thing happen in our industry. So while we have this barrage of offers to advertise in magazines, the best thing you can do as an artist is to use social media. It's free and it can reach a larger audience.
And you're on all social media channels that I can see: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
You have to have a strategy where you're on all of those platforms to actually reach the largest audience possible. I'm lucky because my wife actually spends a lot of time on my marketing. So I can focus on the painting and the teaching, and she handles all that marketing. But your strategy has to involve a cadence. So you have to promote a certain amount of times per week, per day, usually about once a day. You have to have consistency. You have to reach the right people. And you have to say something that's relevant to them. So I know there are a lot of scams happening in the social media world as well. I get multiple emails per day where I'm offered, you can buy so many followers for this amount of money. I recommend that artists never purchase followers and never
stay away. Ads. Don't do it.
That's right, because it will hurt you in the long run. Social media is free, and you should use it in a free manner and grow your audience organically. So we've been very lucky. Since we hit the road, my presence has grown because people get to know me around the country, which has in turn grown my social media presence. And then that's grown organically as well. So people from around the world know who I am through social media. And we've never paid anything for it. It's all free.
Do you ever participate in any type of paid campaigns on social media? Never have. Well,
what that does is it hurts you. So I worked, because I was in the marketing industry, I worked directly with Google and Facebook and Instagram. So I understand a little bit more about their algorithms. And you're going to hear that word algorithm from a lot of people. They'll tell you how they understand how it works. But what I read is usually incorrect. It's all about relevancy. So the more people that are interested in what you do, the more Facebook or Instagram or any social media platform decides that your content is relevant, and it will put it in front of more people. But they have to be real people. So when you get an offer to buy followers, those are click farms normally. And because they're lower in the algorithm. So when those followers follow you, it forces down your percentage of likes per post. And the less likes or engagements you have per post, the less likely it is that your content gets out there to more people. So it has to be real. You can't buy it. If you buy it, it will hurt you.
What do you think about maintaining an email list of your own?
I think that's very important, and I do that. Not everybody gets their content through social media. Some prefer it through email, so I think e-newsletters are very important. But that's another place where content is really important. You have to have something to say. So you can talk about your art. You can talk about art in general. You can talk about the industry. You can also promote things within there, but it has to be relevant content that people want to read.
Before it goes into the junk folder.
Exactly, that's right. And if you put things out there that people, one bad e-newsletter can turn someone off and they'll unsubscribe, so you'll lose them. We're getting so technical with marketing here. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, it needs to be discussed. It's something we're keenly aware of, and some are more comfortable with it than others. But let's face it, if you're going to do something yourself, you gotta learn how to use the tool to make it happen. So,
I tend to geek out on it because of my background in the marketing industry.
Well, I think it's valuable. I think it's good information. I appreciate you sharing it with our audience. Are you on YouTube as well?
I am on YouTube. Mostly it's just short clips, video clips, some promotional videos. I don't put full demonstration content on YouTube. And with these new videos I'm creating, they will not be housed there. I'm considering Vimeo for that.
Right. Yeah. Vimeo on demand is a great service.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. I've used that before, and I've used Wistia, which I think Vimeo ends up being a better experience and more affordable.
And that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want something that's going to be consistent and actually deliver the video in the appropriate manner. YouTube can get slow, break down, and not deliver as tight an experience as Vimeo. YouTube is really important when it comes to SEO or search engine optimization, because being on there gets your profile up in search on Google. And that is key to people finding you. You want to be searchable. So that's another reason to be on every platform. Even Twitter might seem like a strange one for a visual artist, but that ups your SEO. And SEO is king when it comes to people finding you who've never heard of you before. Hashtags are really important. So I see lots of weird hashtags out there on Facebook or on Instagram. Strange hashtags don't work. It has to be searchable terms. What is someone going to type in? If they're interested in representational painting, what are they going to type in their browser to find it? That's where your hashtags come from.
I got to do a better job with hashtags. I don't do a great job.
They work.
Do you need to use a lot or just a few?
You can use as many as you want. I've heard individuals out there say, if you use too many hashtags, it will hurt you. That's not true. Use as many as you need, many as you feel comfortable with. Using less means that you're searchable under fewer terms. The more you use, the more search terms apply to you.
Is it most important on Instagram or other platforms as well?
Every platform, because people search every bit. Google spiders search every platform out there. So if you have hashtags on every platform, then your search relevancy goes up. So Facebook is searchable by Google. Instagram is searchable by Google. Obviously, YouTube is. That's a Google platform. So you want to use hashtags everywhere.
So let's say I want to talk about a painting experience. I just finished a painting and I want to show it to the world. What would be good terms to include for that painting when I make that post on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram?
Anything that's included in the subject matter you've painted.
Like the location, the subject?
Right. So if you're exactly the town you're in, the state you're in, is it a painting of a house or a landscape, a tree? Those are all relevant search terms. And then it's a painting, so obviously hashtag painting. Relevant hashtags. Someone is going to search for a certain thing, and that's how they're going to find you. If you put in some weird hashtag, or, there's a lot of popular hashtags on Instagram, like hashtag InstaArt, and I see that used everywhere.
But those will have millions.
It's used everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't help you because it's so broad. No one cares. They're not going to find you through that. It's not relevant to you. It's not specific enough.
Instead of saying plein air painting, you probably should say something like plein air Austin, Texas, or something like that. Am I on the right track?
Yes, but keep in mind that hashtags are cumulative as well. So if you do a hashtag plein air painting and then you have hashtag Austin, hashtag Texas.
Ah, okay.
If someone typed in Austin, Texas plein air painting, you've got all three of those covered. So your relevancy moves up.
Gotcha. Well, let's move back to painting. Let's talk about painting because that's what this is about. Painting is the fun stuff. Yeah. And one of the things I really enjoyed was watching a demo. We mentioned that earlier at Piedmont Driving Club in connection with Olmsted Plein Air. And I was just, the first thing I noticed as I walked in the room where the demonstration was going to be held, I saw this incredible portrait. It just captured my eye. I couldn't take my eye off of it. It was a portrait of a Native American, and I think, if I remember correctly, it was called War Dancer. It was
yes.
And it was incredible. I thought that was such a beautiful painting. What's the story behind that painting?
Kimberly and I were traveling through Arizona. We were in Prescott, Arizona, and we heard about a powwow that was happening. And we thought that'd be a great opportunity to check out the local culture. And we went there for the afternoon, and we met a man named Percy Edwards. And that was him in the painting, completely authentic. His costume was amazing. The headdress, everything about it, head to toe. And I'm a very shy person, so I'm watching him from afar. Kimberly says, I'm going to go up and ask him if I can take some photos. And she did. So she walked right up to him and said, hey, would you be interested in letting me take some photos so that my husband can do some paintings of you? And he said, sure, you can take some photos. I'll stand here. And I offered, I said, when the painting is complete, I will send you a print. He said, I've been painted lots of times before, whatever. He didn't care. I couldn't paint him right there on the spot, obviously, because he's busy with the powwow. And he had no problem with the photography, which I took back to what I would call my studio, my canopy outdoors. And I did the painting, and it came together really quickly because there was so much character. It always helps to meet somebody as well. So I got to watch him dance, so I understood more about him than just someone else's photo. And Kimberly understands exactly what I need in a photo. So she's taking those photos, understanding that I'm going to do a painting. So she understands the lighting that works for me. So I did the painting, and I actually sent him an image of it, and I never heard back. I don't know if he didn't get the image or what happened, but later on, when that won an award from the Portrait Painters of America, we got an email from him. Hey, I want a print of that painting.
Oh, now you want it.
Right. We did make him a giclée. I think he saw it through social media because it really took off on social media after I posted it. So we sent him a giclée, and he's very happy with it. And he offered to pose for me again whenever I would like. Oh,
that's very nice. It is a very striking portrait. It's just the colors, the composition, the essence of the person that you're portraying in that painting. I just remember walking in that room, and boom, that's what my eye went to. It's that striking, and perhaps it had that same emotional response to him. He was a very striking figure, so that came from him. You did a larger version of that portrait as well. I did. While we were in Noonan, I had the opportunity, like I said, with a big studio space, I did a 5-foot tall version of it. So it's slightly different composition, but yeah, that was exciting because I don't get to paint a lot of large paintings because we're on the road. So having that opportunity was great. One of the things that impressed me about the demonstration you did a pet portrait, and you've mentioned that earlier, is something that you and Kimberly are very passionate about, pets. And it was beautiful to watch this come into play. But there were two things that impressed me. One was your interactiveness with the audience. You know, I can't hardly think and talk at the same time. So seeing your interaction with the audience was just, that was a very refreshing experience to see. Well, I wasn't always that outgoing. I was, like I said, a very shy, introverted person. When I first started playing in bands, I would get up on stage and my back leg would shake so much that I was worried that people would laugh, but they all thought it was part of the act. I was just dancing. And so I got used to being in front of people that way. And then I started teaching,
which helped. I started teaching at my alma mater, the Kansas City Art Institute. So I got used to speaking in front of students. That was 20 years ago. And what I found out really fast was it's difficult to keep someone's attention if you're not telling a good story. You might have really great information to convey, but you have to give them more. You have to keep them a part of it. They need to speak back to you. It has to be a two-way conversation. So that's what I try to do in my classes and all my demonstrations. I've got my back to the audience. So once again, that artist self-esteem thing comes in where I'm wondering, what are they thinking back there? If they're quiet, I start to get nervous. So I turn around and I address the audience, and I want them to talk to me while I'm painting. So I know they're still there. They're still a part of it. It's not just an instructional piece. It's an experience for all of us. And I get more out of it because they ask me questions that I've never even considered. So that helps me grow as an artist because I'm considering new things that I never thought about. So I really love talking about art. I love painting. Putting those two things together is wonderful. I sometimes at the detriment of my painting because I'll talk too much. I stop painting and I talk too much, and then someone in the audience will say, "Well, come on, paint more." Okay, we'll get into that.
Well, you did a great job with that. One of the things the students seemed to be asking a lot was your practice of measuring. You did a lot of measuring during that, and I thought that was fascinating because I'd not seen it done to that extent. Measuring seems to be a big part of your process when doing a painting, whether it's from photo or from life.
So I'm trying to paint things as accurately as I see them, and we all tend to skew things. Some of us will elongate things horizontally. Some of us will elongate things vertically. That's normal. So I'm constantly comparing one object to another. And as you saw, I didn't draw first. I like a lot of spontaneity in my work. So I just work with shapes, and I just start putting shapes in and comparing those to each other. So there is no underlying drawing. I studied as an illustrator, and I worked in ways where you have to understand the skeletal structure beneath a figure before you can paint the figure. Lots of complicated. I learned how to name all the muscles and all the bones, but I've thrown all that out. It's really, for me now, about visual comparisons. And it's better for me not to even understand what it is that I'm painting. I just see darks and lights and warms and cools. And if I put those on in the right combination, the subject just emerges. So measuring is really important because I need to decide, is this shape larger or smaller than that one, and exactly how much? Because if you're not thinking about the overall skeletal structure, you can't rely on any of those gimmicks or formulas that you might have in the past. You have to put down exactly what you see.
You know, I've been terrified of late by some of the some artists that are saying I need to study for years anatomy and all of these things to do a portrait, and that's all fine and good if I were in my 20s, but I'm not. I'm an old guy, so I don't have time to spend years studying anatomy. I would rather learn how to just put down on canvas or board or paper what I see before me. So I guess that's one of the things that appealed to me about your approach in that demo was this idea of putting down what you see, the shapes, and then you would edit for accuracy. I could watch you do that, and that was such a neat experience to see.
Well, any of those underlying things that you might study, like anatomy or perspective, they can't hurt you, but they are not necessary. That is understanding why things react or look a certain way, but it's not necessary to conveying what you see. So you mentioned that I correct a lot and I remeasure. I feel like painting for all of us, or drawing, any type of art making, it's just a series of mistakes because we are influenced by our preconceived notions. So if I ask you to draw a certain subject out of your head, you might be able to do it, but it's in a more cartoonish manner. It's not necessarily correct because everything is affected by our memory. And that goes with when things are right in front of you, that happens as well. So you have to measure to be sure that you've got it right and you aren't influenced by your preconceived ideas. My first assignment when I was in art school was to draw my parents from memory. And everybody in the class had a hard time with it. I would say that we all failed. But that was a great lesson because that came from within us. We thought we knew what someone looked like because we have an idea what they look like, but it's very vague. It's not accurate. It's not correct. It is a memory, and memories can be off the mark many times. And I'm not saying that memory doesn't help because it adds something to it. All your experiences add up to the way you paint or depict certain things. They do influence. I just try not to let mine over-influence because what I'm trying to capture is that actual momentary experience that I had with that subject. And the painting is a record of that experience, and I try to get that record as accurate as I can.
And measuring plays a good part of that, and observation.
Big part.
Yeah.
Big part in that.
It short circuits that brain of ours, the preconceptions. That's right. A good lesson.
Painting a lot of portraits, I always noticed that if I was painting a child's portrait, that one of the parents would say that looks exactly like my daughter, and the other parent would say that doesn't look like my daughter.
Okay, you got a couple of problems there.
I got in the habit of asking them to bring me photos that, even though I was going to shoot photos or paint from life, I would ask them to bring me photos that they felt best represented their child. And they were always different because with everyone we know, we have an idea of what that person looks like from a certain moment in their life. And that sticks with us forever. You know, when you look in the mirror, you also remember yourself from a certain age. We all do it.
Yeah, we have a persona in mind.
That's right. And we have that persona for everyone we know, including ourselves. So even though a portrait might be accurate, it's not necessarily the memory that that person has of their loved one. And so they feel it's inaccurate. So you have to take that into account.
So how do you adjust for that?
Well, number one, it's age. So I may be painting someone that is 10 years older than that memory, which is why I ask for them to show me photos of that person
okay,
that's being
right.
painted. So if you see that there's a big age difference, you can adjust for that. Or there might be a weight difference. They may have gained weight or lost weight. People change a lot. Children change very quickly. So you need to understand in advance what their memory holds. And you can actually lead them into a better understanding of what that person looks like now if you go through a sketch phase as well.
I notice also looking at your artwork that you're very diverse in what you paint. So portraits, beautifully done, pet portraits, urban scenes, countryside, landscapes. But one thing I've noticed, you travel all over the country. You see these sweeping vistas that you cannot hardly ignore, but yet your paintings have an intimacy to it. It's not like I'm not necessarily going to find a sweeping vista of the Grand Canyon with you, but I'm going to see something more intimate than the sweeping vistas that you travel through. Why is that?
So I'm not a big vista painter because a lot of times that's sort of ubiquitous. That's what people see everywhere. A lot of photographers take big sweeping vistas. A lot of painters paint big sweeping vistas. I am looking for the more intimate. I'm looking for those small details that jump out at me. That's more important to me. Those are the things I remember. I found that as we travel, I don't even remember the vistas. I remember, there was that tree that was twisted in a certain shape. That was pretty cool. So those are the things that stick with me personally. Those are the things I want to paint. More intimate moments feel more personal to me. It's not that I don't like the vistas. it's just not the thing that jumps out because we see it every day. Now we have a culture that lives on photos and imagery online through social media. So you'll see those beautiful, you mentioned the Grand Canyon, you see those beautiful vistas every day. And I go and see it in person. And obviously there's a big difference seeing it in person than seeing it in imagery. But I also want to capture those things that people are not normally seeing. I'm looking for something different. I'm looking for something that takes you to that place in a way you haven't imagined before. And I feel like those are the paintings that spoke to me as well. Paintings that felt somewhat ordinary, yet made the ordinary beautiful. I'm a big fan of Russian painters, the Russian Impressionists from the early 20th century, mid 20th century. They painted scenes of everyday life. And that was what was exciting for me. I'm not a fan of big vista landscape painters that have become very popular, like Bierstadt. I just those don't appeal to me. They feel somewhat cold. They're great paintings. I'm not knocking the paintings at all, but I don't feel as strong an emotional connection to them. They make me feel rather unconnected to that landscape. Whereas a smaller, more intimate painting, not smaller in scale, but more closed in on a certain subject, makes me feel more connected to it, as if I'm there.
A photographer friend of mine, his name is Rick Salmon, he used to tell me, he says, break the force field. And I'd say, oh, what do you mean break the force field? He says, you got to go in closer. So he was trying to get us out of this mold of thinking about the vistas and moving in and capturing the details, the textures, get closer in, break that force field of, sometimes we feel like there's a boundary there where we can't get closer to the person or the subject. And so we got to break in. That's why you would call it breaking the force field. Push beyond that, where you're so uncomfortable, then you're going to capture that image that's going to be different than what most people do.
And part of that comes from my training as an illustrator. I studied illustration in art school, and we looked at point of view quite frequently. How do you get a different point of view? We spent a lot of time looking at the work of Chris Van Allsburg, the children's book author, and his point of view was so different in his books. Bird's eye, worm's eye view, never straight on. Not that there's anything wrong with looking at something straight on, but if you change that perspective and that point of view, that painting becomes something new, and the new attracts people. Wow, I never thought of looking at something that way before. That's exciting not only to view those paintings, but it's exciting to attempt to paint those things. And I'm always trying to paint new subject. I love variety. I try not to paint the same thing over and over. And I actually tend to be drawn towards things that I don't feel like I could necessarily capture and paint. If it scares me, I'm going to paint it. Because if I feel like I can't paint it, that's a challenge.
Give me a good example of something that you're working on like that right now. What are you doing to get you out of that comfort zone?
A lot of times I will be afraid to approach a certain subject matter or specific subject matter. So something might be, I'll give you a couple of good examples of what has changed me as a painter over the years. I didn't paint landscapes. I couldn't paint landscapes. I was afraid to, because as an illustrator, I worked with the old model of having to understand everything you're painting, understand the structure, right down to the skeletal structure. And when I looked at landscapes, there were just too many things that I couldn't tell exactly where one began and another ended. I got that backwards. Where one ended and another began. Yeah. And so I wouldn't do it because it scared me, because I thought, well, that tree over there, I don't know if that's part of that tree or part of the tree next to it, and I couldn't do it. So when I actually did start painting landscapes, because I forced myself, because I was so afraid of it, I realized that I don't have to understand everything that I'm painting. That's where I started to move more towards painting the lights, the values, darks and lights versus colors, and not worrying about what they were. So that changed everything for me, because I was willing to take that risk. I sometimes will see a subject that's incredibly complicated, and I think there's no way that I could capture that. And so I'll try to paint it. I had an experience in Richmond, Virginia, where there was this beautiful staircase on the back of a house, and I loved the staircase. I thought, well, that would be really cool, but the light splashed across it. It was dappled light, very complicated. The light changed frequently because when you're painting from life, everything's moving quickly. So I thought, there's no way I can paint it. It just changes too fast. But I gave it a shot anyway. Lots of architectural in there with the stairs. And I failed. It was a terrible painting. And I scraped it down and did other work during that week. It was part of a plein air competition. But I came back the next year and I tried it again. And it worked. And I realized that I could do that. So I find we feel like we can't paint certain subjects. I have a lot of students that say, well, I can paint landscapes, but I can't paint portraits, or I can paint the still life, but I can't paint outdoors because the light changes too fast. I'm a big believer in no subject is any more difficult than any other subject. We just have to convince ourselves of that by trying it. And we have to separate ourselves from the difference in subjects because they're all just made up of the same thing. Values, colors, drawing. There's no difference between a portrait of a person and a painting of a tree. They're all made up of the same elements.
Yeah, academically, that's easy to accept. Emotionally, it can be very difficult. I know in my own self, I feel all those emotions you just described, all of those things. No, I can't do that. I don't think I could do that very well.
But that circles back to what I was talking about earlier, where your preconceived ideas get in the way.
Yeah.
We believe that certain subjects are harder than other subjects, but they're not. If a camera can capture anything, we can too. If my printer can print out absolutely anything and it doesn't take any longer to print one thing than it does another, it shouldn't take any longer for me as a painter. And not to break it down into something scientific like that, because there is an emotional response to everything. That emotional response inspires you to keep going, to paint it. And I don't paint anything that I'm not in some way emotionally attached to. It doesn't tell me a story. And that story could be very simple. It could be, I love the way the light cascades across that, or it could be a very personal connection, like I'm painting a person that I know, a family member, but you need that emotional connection. But that emotional connection can then also get in the way of your approach to it. So there's a balance between your emotional connection to the subject and then those preconceived ideas that get in the way of actually capturing that subject that you need to reach. You need to reach that balance.
Well, yeah. And I got to admit, I had a struggle for a while with this whole idea of something telling a story. I mean, it may seem obvious to a lot of people, and of course you've had the experience in illustration and illustrating with purpose and telling a story that way. But to me, I struggled with that. I said, well, what story what does this snapshot? See, I guess that's the way I was looking at it. How does this snapshot actually tell a story? It's taken a lot of time for me to figure out that the story doesn't, I guess what I'm thinking of, this is tough. I can't figure out how to say what I'm trying to say.
I know exactly what you mean.
Okay. Tell me what I mean. So, I'm having a hard time putting it into words. It's very difficult for me it was a skill I'm still developing it. How do I take something that's just a snapshot and it tells a story?
So when you are thinking about the story in your painting, it's not necessarily a very literal story.
And maybe that's what I'm fighting. Yeah.
That's exactly right. So when we were first learning, especially in studying illustration, the story was usually dictated by whatever article I was creating or book I was creating an illustration to support. That's very literal. But there's also emotional stories. There's a much more emotional impact that comes from some paintings that don't tell a literal story at all. They just elicit a certain feeling. And you can look at representational art. Many times they do tell a very detailed story. Sometimes they don't. It's just a feeling. I understand the season. I understand the temperature, or I can almost smell the trees in that painting or the grass because of the way it's rendered. And then you can take that all the way in the direction of abstract art. And it might be that you get a certain emotional feeling from colors or tones. We were at the Tate Modern last August and saw the Rothko paintings, the Seagram collection. There's a room in the Tate Modern that is just Rothko paintings that he painted. It was for the Four Seasons. And the Four Seasons, the restaurant in the Four Seasons in New York, they commissioned him to do the work.
Those are large pieces too, right? They're very large.
Very large, yeah. And they're just blocks of color. But they felt they were too moody for their restaurant. And wow, you can feel it. When you walk into that room, it feels like a cathedral. It is so moving, and it's based on the colors in the paintings. Now, I know a lot of representational artists get offended by painting like Rothko because it's just blocks of colors. Well, I could do that. Anybody could do that. But you have to experience them in person to get that full emotional story that's coming through. You can feel it.
I know before we started recording, you and I have had this conversation before about representational art versus modern art. I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I am a big fan of modern art, and I feel like it influences my work greatly. Having gone to traditional art school, I studied everything. And in my opinion, art is art. There's going to be art that you like, and there's going to be art that you don't like. That's okay. Your personal preference is in there, but we should embrace all art. And even if you don't like it, it has a relevant place. And there are things you can take from modern art that can help your representational art. For instance, one of my favorite painters is Helen Frankenthaler. And if you're not familiar with her work, she just mixes up really large buckets of thin paint. She puts paint in with buckets of turpentine, and she pours that paint over the canvas, and it just drips down. And there's a beauty to paint itself. Well, that translates into my own work. When I start a painting, and you saw that in the demonstration that I did in Atlanta, I start almost like watercolor, and the paint just drips and it flows. There's a beauty to that texture. That's the way I started painting. And then I continue to develop over that. I take it further. It's different than what she did, but I think of her when I did those pieces, or when I start that work. There is so much story in modern art as well. And we might not agree with all of it, but that's where I learned that story doesn't have to be so literal. It can be about an emotion. It can be about a feeling. One of the things I got from art school that was so important were those art history classes and art theory classes, where we studied not only traditional painting from the past, but modern art. And when I say the word modern art, that has a certain connotation, but we have to remember the first modern art was Impressionism. That was modern art. It was art that broke the mold from the allegorical or historical concept, and they started painting things that were more about their feelings and their experience with the subject. Impressionism is the first modern art, and everything in modern art since owes something back to Impressionism. So one day we may look back and we may look at a Rothko, we might like it, we might not like it, but it's going to have influenced everything after. Every movement in art has influenced every movement afterwards. And that's why I feel like there's no sense in comparing or feeling like one is battling the other. Why not embrace all of it and move together as a singular art world where we all do different things, but they are still all focused on the purpose of us understanding, capturing, and conveying our world and our emotions.
Clyde Aspavig was a lecturer for one of the earlier Olmsted plein air events, and that was the point he was making. He said, we should embrace the ideas of modern art. A representational painter can certainly learn from that. And ironically, it's interesting when you talk to many artists, they are looking for the abstract in the representational art that they're doing. So it's interesting how even those that may have a very strong negative reaction toward modern art, they're actually seeking some of those techniques and ways of expression and incorporating that in their art today.
Absolutely. I think our experiences, even outside of art, affect everything that we do in our own work, and modern art included. Even if someone that says, I don't care for modern art, there's usually an influence in their work that they may not even be aware of. I also think there's been a backlash against modern art in a way to promote representational painting. It's a form of saying, hey, it's us versus them. And we see that in a lot of society now, that the team aspect, I'm on this team, you're on that team. And we use that competition to try to push ourselves forward, one over the other. I don't think that's necessary. I think we should consider ourselves part of a much larger group. So when someone duct tapes a banana to a wall, I don't get offended by that. I actually find that hilarious. There's nothing wrong with art.
It was done by
funny.
A comedian.
Exactly.
It was hilarious.
So, and if it sells for a lot of money, I'm not offended either. That's part of the joke. And I'm certain that the buyers understood the joke. They had the money to throw away, which ethically, that may be a problem.
Yeah,
but I don't have any issue with the art creation itself. I mean, that goes all the way back to Marcel Duchamp signing a urinal, even though we know now that he wasn't necessarily the one that initially did that. That idea that everything is art and the visual world is beyond just traditional painting and sculpture makes us appreciate everything in our world. There's a beauty to that. And why shouldn't we embrace all of that?
It's a conundrum because I think a lot of times we put definitions on things too that kind of creates these divisions. It makes it hard to categorize. For example, I will say I like beautiful art. Okay, that's a pretty broad subject, but does that discount Picasso's Guernica? No,
right.
It's not what I'm not. I haven't thought of doing a painting like that, which depicts something that's it was very horrific. Does it have its place in history? Yes, definitely. It's not what I want to do, but it does have its place. But it would be hard to just say I only like beautiful art, because there are some art that moves me that I wouldn't say necessarily is beautiful.
And then what's the definition of beauty? I think that becomes
there you go.
To assess as well.
Yeah.
Because there's a beauty in the picturesque. Obviously, that's what most of us mean by beauty, picturesque and pleasing. But there's also a beauty in depicting human emotion and experiences so that we can understand and have empathy towards other people's experiences. And that comes through in a painting like Guernica. And that comes through in a lot of 20th century art. You see a big movement or a big change in the art world after World War I, where art became much darker. But that was a response to the experiences the world was having. I'm not a big fan of, say, Max Beckmann. They're really dark paintings. But I appreciate that he was conveying his world and the emotions that were present at that time in history. And all of that, I feel, influences art as it moves forward. And at the opposite end, you might have like an illustrator like Norman Rockwell. You can appreciate Norman Rockwell for his technical expertise. They're a bit sappy, but there's also a beauty to them as well, because that was another aspect of life in the mid-20th century. All that together made way for more of the 1960s artists that were balancing between the two. And then I feel like art, as far as a representational sense, we're told a lot that it disappeared in the 20th century and it's only recently been brought back. And I have to argue that is not the case at all. It might not have held such a prominent place in pop culture, but it was always there. It just evolved into something different. Like I mentioned, Norman Rockwell, representational art moved more into the commercial and illustration world throughout most of the 20th century. Even graphic novel comic books were huge when I was going to art school.
Yeah.
That's representational art, some great representational art. It was just presented in a different format. So it never went away. We're not bringing anything back. And I hear that a lot too, that we're part of some movement bringing back representational art. I completely disagree, because if that were the case, what were all of those artists doing? Those artists that I admire from the mid to late 20th century who were great representational artists, are we saying they didn't exist and we're bringing it back? That's definitely not true. It just moves in different ways. Just as we are moving more to an online culture now, and we're experiencing art through social media and digital imagery, the art itself has moved through different facets as well. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. It was there.
You also see in the 20th century, beginning in the 19th century, and maybe even among a few artists, even before then, is experimentation. There's a lot of experimentalness going on. People trying new ideas. Let's try this and see what happens. What happens when I express myself in this way? What if I just study line and shape, irrespective of the subject? All of those things were interesting because they were pushing an envelope. They were experimenting with different ways. And I think we end up incorporating that in our artist psyche. Today in the 21st century, we have this repertoire, this incredible repertoire of experiments and approaches to art that can make the art move forward.
And that is a beautiful thing. I mean, to have no rules as an artist is what we should all strive for. So I know painters that say they're plein air painters or they're portrait painters. I hope that all of us can just consider ourselves painters and never feel constrained. I don't feel like I have to paint plein air all the time. I don't feel like I have to paint from life all the time. I have no problem working from photographs. It's whatever it takes for me to convey the feelings and emotions and memories that I want to convey. The rules do not matter. I know some artists prefer to work with a limited palette, and they may use that as a badge of honor, and that's fine, but you don't have to work with a limited palette. There's no rules to anything. Do whatever it takes to express yourself. And that is what modern art has allowed us to do. So if you think back to the time of French salons, they had specific rules on what you had to achieve in that painting in order to even submit it, like portraying human flesh in the shadow and in the light within the same painting. That was one of the aspects that had to be within that painting for it to even be submitted. That seems silly to me now. Now we have different groups now that they have competitions and they have rules. That's fine. Competitions and certain exhibitions can have specific criteria, but as artists, we should always feel open to experiment and create new things by combining what was done in the past. And that's one of the things that is so invaluable to me from my experience in art school is the focus on art history. I was exposed to so much, which is not something you can get if you study just technique. So workshops are great. You get a lot of technique. Atelier is great. You get a lot of technique. But art school gave you a deep dive into everything that has come before, and that influences your growth and your direction as an artist today. So I think that's very important.
I wished I'd had more interest in that when I was younger. You know, my fifth grade teacher, she was an art teacher. She tried very hard, and her lessons did stick with me, but I was not interested at that time. You know, I just wasn't. But now I am, and it is the history, it's the life of the artist and their thought processes as to what they were doing, why they painted what they painted, and how they came to do that. It's fascinating to me today. I just wish I'd been interested in it when I was much younger, but I can't look past. I just have to move forward and keep learning.
It's never too late, though. You can always study those things, and you don't have to go to art school to get it.
No.
That was a very focused way to do it for me. But you can buy books on it. You know, Jansen's History of Art is comprehensive.
I've got it.
Used in art. There you go.
Yeah.
Read it.
That is a classic.
Fantastic. There's so much. Yes. I love traveling to museums. My wife and I visit every museum we can when we travel the country to see all those pieces in person and to experience them one-on-one, because it's very different in a book.
It is.
The scale isn't there. The colors don't necessarily transfer correctly. The emotions don't come across. But just visiting a museum and taking it all in, not just the pieces you like, but the pieces that you didn't think you'd be interested in, you will find things you never expected. We were in Amsterdam last year, and we went to the Hermitage Museum, and it's mostly Dutch masters, just portraits of specific Dutch citizens. It wasn't something from a technical aspect that I was that interested in, but the way it was presented, and this may be the most technologically advanced museum we've ever been to. You would walk into a gymnasium-sized room, and the walls are covered with portraits of these Dutch masters. And the lights dim and spotlights show up on specific people within the paintings, and they explain their history and why they may have been depicted in that painting, or they talk about their fashion of the time, or why they have certain accoutrements with them, or why one person is at one end of a table or next to another person. It's fascinating. There's so much to learn there from a story perspective. And the presentation is a knockout. It keeps you entranced on something that you might not normally care about. So you never know what you're going to be exposed to that you weren't interested in before, that now you have a sudden interest in it.
There is no substitute to seeing the real thing. I think that's one of the disadvantages that I love doing this podcast and talking to artists, but I have to admit, not all my guests, I've actually seen their work in person. So I see a representation of it in an art magazine, right, online, and that's great. I mean, there is a level of, you can tell that it's great art, but boy, when you see it in person, it is truly different. Just like I've seen a few of your pieces, so I have a very vivid image in my mind because I got to see it. I got to see the scale. I got to see the textures, the colors, everything. Just it's so informative to see, and it's so inspiring to see. So there is an advantage in actually seeing it. I just right now we're all at a disadvantage because we can't go out and see it, and hopefully that will end before long. But I do miss going to my local museums here in the Atlanta, Georgia area and seeing art up close. I miss that. So hopefully we'll get back to it soon.
Yeah, I hope so too, because that is one of my favorite things to do. And it's also great to experience art with other people. So, Kimberly and I go to the museums together, and I will see a piece that just knocks my socks off, and she will see a piece that she's completely enthralled by, and we might not agree. I might not be interested in that piece she's interested in, but then she'll point out to me what grabs her in that piece, and I'll see it too. And that opens my eyes to new experiences as well, and vice versa happens. We're so caught up in our own likes and dislikes that sometimes we don't open ourselves to new things. And unfortunately, I feel like our digital lifestyle plays into that. because we can so quickly swipe past whatever it is we're not interested in. There's no time to focus. When you go to a museum, you have to walk by those other paintings that you don't care about. It takes you much longer to walk past them than it is to swipe through photos online. So there's nothing like the actual experience. And I know, like you said, we can't always travel. So I would encourage everyone to take more time online. Don't swipe past those pieces that you believe you don't care about. Look at them, and what is it about them that made them famous or made someone share them? Because there's a reason. There was an illustrator by the name of Marshall Airstream. He was huge in the 1980s, and I saw him give a talk. He talked about how publishers in the 80s, even though photography was much easier and was actually cheaper at that time, because illustration was wildly expensive, they preferred, he worked a lot for Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, all the big publications. They preferred his work because someone might gloss over a photo because it was becoming so common. Now, since then, photography has regressed where it's much more hands-on and much more involved and personal. But at that time, photography was just a capture of an image. There was a lot less in the commercial world. There was a lot less manipulation to it. He said that publishers wanted his work because if someone took the time to paint that thing, there's something important about it. And they tended to linger on that image to try to figure out what it was that was important about it, and he could have a stronger impact. And I think that's true with all imagery. If you focus in, wonder, what was the artist's experience? Why did they choose to paint this or photograph this? You'll get a lot more out of it.
I think if some advertising that was done today went back to some of the great illustrators of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it might actually stand out in the digital purity of photography that's used so much today. It would actually stand out in my mind if I saw that. It would just leap out because it'd be so different now.
That's true. That's true. And I think about it, back in the mid 20th century, there used to be artists that were on site at whether it was a political happening or a big event. Like Bernie Fuchs, for instance, was the White House illustrator. And I don't know if you're familiar with Bernie Fuchs's work, but he was the illustrator during the John F. Kennedy administration. And those illustrations conveyed something more than a photograph. Not to say there aren't incredibly moving and stirring photographs from that period, but his illustrations added to that. And I do believe that every aspect of the art world, whether it's photography or representational art or modern art, add to our understanding of an era. And that's particularly evident at that time. We don't see that today as much, where artists are embedded in situations like that.
Yeah, what do they call it? They call it the gig economy. Everybody's a freelancer, a contractor. You just bring in, I know a guy or a gal that can do that photo or that drawing or whatever. Yeah, right. Yeah. No one has the time to, or the budget to allow someone to soak in the culture of that business or that service that's being offered. Yeah, that would be great if you could still do that.
Well, that's why it was such a great opportunity for me to be able to do the residency in Noonan. And that was an opportunity for me to come experience that place and react to it. And I do believe that that's starting to change again. We're understanding more the idea of a more embedded artist in a particular situation. We're giving more time so that we can experience beyond the quick snapshot. You know, our Instagram world is all about, well, here's a quick shot of my food. Here's a quick shot of where I'm going today. And it's almost given us information or visual overload where we don't really notice the importance of images. And that goes back to storytelling. Once again, it's more than snapshots. I think art is something that actually conveys much more intimate moments and important moments than just, well, here's the tacos I ate today.
Yeah. These are the kind of things I could talk about forever, or listen to forever.
Me too. I love it.
So when you went to Three Hearts Farm in Noonan there, Meredith had a few Mark English pieces in there, and that was my first time I'd ever seen his work up close and in person. Didn't you study with him at one time?
I did. I studied with Mark at the Kansas City Art Institute. He was there in the late 80s, and I studied with him and his son, John. And then I studied again with Mark. He reopened the Illustration Academy that he had run that, I believe it was in the 60s and 70s, and he decided to reopen it again. He opened it in Kansas City. At the time, I worked for Hallmark Cards, and Hallmark Cards actually paid for me to go to the Illustration Academy.
Nice.
They had continuous learning. Yeah, Hallmark was a wonderful place to work. This was in the early 90s. And they were big believers in continuous improvement for artists. So they would ask us what we wanted to do that year for what they called research trips. And my decision was to go study again with Mark at the Illustration Academy. Mark was one of those illustrators that went beyond just creating what he knew how to create for each instance. He would try new things. He would stretch it. And he would try different materials. He would try different points of view.
He was an experimenter. Yeah,
that's right. I watched him paint with house paint. He was a fabulous teacher and a fabulous artist. And the most important aspect for him was design. He was a great designer. So he knew how to lay out that image to keep your eyes within it. His experiments didn't always work, but when they did, wow, it was something new. I worked with him, and he brought a lot of great illustrators in to the Kansas City Art Institute at that time and to the Illustration Academy. I met Thomas Blackshear, and I got to, my work was critiqued by all of these artists as well, which was great, especially as a student. Worked with Malcolm Lipke, Gary Kelly, all the big illustrators.
I remember seeing those ads in Step by Step Graphics magazine for, study under Mark English and these other illustrators. I can't remember which school it was for. It might have been Kansas or I don't remember which one it was, but they would run ads about studying under these illustrators.
Mark was really into art history too. Mark was, he would talk a lot about not just illustrators, but he would say, hey, you should look at this painter's work. It was fabulous. And then we ran into him when we lived in New York. He was having a show at the Eleanor Ettinger Gallery. And he brought over this older gentleman and he said, hey, I want you to meet Bernie Fuchs. Wow. Bernie Fuchs. Yeah. I got to meet Bernie in person, and I was always a big fan of Bernie. So great experience.
Well, Patrick, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story. I know there's much more to your story than what we've been able to touch on today, but it's been a real pleasure to talk about the wide range of topics that you've discussed today. It's been a lot of fun. It's been very informative, and it's opened up my mind in a lot of different ways that I hadn't anticipated. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine.
I hope you found this a fascinating and informative conversation with Patrick Saunders. Just a lot of gems in this episode. One of the things that he mentioned I want to bring out, he was talking about he and Kimberly doing their own video tutorials for his painting. Well, after recording this episode, Patrick and Kimberly announced their first painting tutorial. It's called The Dog Portrait in Oils. So be sure to follow Patrick's social media accounts to find out where it can be purchased once it is available for sale. Links to his website and social media are included in the blog post show notes for this episode on carlolson.tv. Also, please check out and support the new reimagined Olmsted Plein Air Invitational. Visit their website, olmstedpleinair.com. The link is also in the show notes. Coming up in the next few weeks on The Artful Painter are artists Jonathan McPhillips, Kyle Ma, Amanda Lovett, Susie Baker, Cynthia Rosen, Nancy Tankersley, and much, much more. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening to this edition of The Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
on the TV.